Designer genes demand a designer. Incredibly complex bodies demand a creator. Voltaire, who was no follower of Christ, said, if a watch proves a watchmaker, but the universe does not prove a great architect, then I consent to be called a fool. Voltaire is right. If a watch proves the existence of a watchmaker, then a complex universe has got to point to a creator. Now, this creator who put us together in the first place wants to give us life eternal. And he's shown that by becoming man in Jesus, who lived a sinless life, who bled and died on a cross, and who rose from the dead. And this Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. And it's his historical resurrection, sir, that's the evidence that he wasn't blowing smoke. He wasn't jerking people around. He was speaking the truth.
You can, even if you were 100% of the way there to proving God's existence, you are only a fraction of the way there to proving the veracity of Christianity. Why Christians, God?
You bet. And the answer to that is real simple. Because of the lifestyle of Jesus, because of the ethical teachings of Jesus, some of which, sir, you're living out right now in your desire to serve your country, all right?
Much of modern morality predated Jesus.
Well, yeah. Yeah, obviously, God didn't give human beings consciences AD. Obviously, BC, human beings had consciences. Third piece of evidence that you can trust Jesus is the way he died. Nailed to a wooden crossbeam, instead of cursing his enemies, he prays, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Wow. I think you and I respect that, don't we? Forgiving his enemies? That's true tolerance. Fourthly, and most importantly, 3 days after Jesus died, he rose from the dead. And over a period of 40 days, he appears to over 500 people who see him risen from the dead. That's why it would be wise for you and me to trust in Christ. Sir, if you die and rise from the dead, I promise to listen very carefully to everything you have to say. See, it's that resurrection. That's why you got to read the gospel, sir, and ask yourself, does the evidence support Christ rising from the dead? Because if Christ rose from the dead, it's a no-brainer. He's speaking the truth.
I'm an ex-Christian. I'm no longer one because I looked at the evidence.
Okay, you're an ex-Christian, and it's because you looked at the evidence. Please tell me, what did you find?
None. I had to choose between Christianity, what I believed about the world, what I knew about the world, science, through education. One of them is demonstrable today. It's consistently. That's not Christianity.
Okay, sir. You're reacting to a bunch of narrow-minded Christians who say that education is evil, science is evil. That's false. Sir, did you know that
rising up from the dead doesn't sound very scientific?
No, that's right. Rising up from the dead is not very scientific, but it's historical. And you can't repeat history in your lab every year at the University of Arizona. Instead, you study the eyewitness testimony of people who saw Jesus risen from the dead. Now, did you know that the 70 out of the first 100, approximately, universities and colleges in the United States were begun by committed followers of Christ? So, sir, the Christians that you bumped into that taught you that science and knowledge is evil and Christianity is right, they were making a false dichotomy. 70 out of the first 100 colleges and universities begun in this country were begun by committed followers of Christ, including Harvard, Yale, on and on. William and Mary, all begun by committed followers of Christ. So, sir, please don't believe the lie that you will hear in certain Christian circles in America, I know, because I bump into them, that education science is opposed to faith in Christ. In fact, he's right here. This guy's from China. Last year when I was here, he did not believe in Christ. Why? Because he thought that science was opposed to faith in Christ, faith in God. Today, he's a follower of Christ because he understood, first of all, that science and education are not anti-Christ, anti-God. But that was an obstacle he had to overcome, and I pray that you'll overcome that obstacle as well. Because it's a lie. If someone tells you science and education are opposed to Christianity, they are lying through their teeth. It's false. Remember, 70 out of 100 first colleges, universities started in America were begun by followers of Christ.
Well, more people were Christian back then than they were today.
I'm sorry?
More people were Christian back then than they were today. If we decide to come up with, if say 200 years from now we had a leading university that were founded today, chances are, I'm willing to bet that that person would not be a follower of the Christian doctrine.
You bet. Fine. And there are many agnostics and atheists who have begun educational institutions. That's not my point. My point is, sir, that the dichotomy that some people create, that there's a contradiction between science and education versus Christianity, is a false dichotomy. Totally false. Johann Kepler, the father of modern astronomy, as he peers out into the stars at night, and you guys are good at astronomy here at the University of Arizona, Johann Kepler, the father of modern astronomy, exclaims, "Oh God, I am thinking your thoughts after you."
Yeah, the way I see it, we don't really have that great of sources for the life of Jesus, for pretty much anything from that time period regarding him. Even the Gospels were written a good deal afterwards. Isn't that maybe where the arrogance lies in claiming that your truth claim is more valid than other truth claims, especially when most of our evidence points to the contrary?
Okay. What's the gap between when Jesus lived, taught, died, and rose from the dead, and the first documents that were written? The gap is about 20 to 60 years. So you've got Paul writing Galatians and Philippians and 1st and 2nd Corinthians in the late 40s, early 50s, mid 50s, late 50s AD. So that's 20 to 30 years after the events. Ma'am, there is nothing from antiquity that even comes close to that kind of gap. The gap between the events that Herodotus, the Greek historian, wrote about is hundreds of years.
That's true, but we don't take what Herodotus said at face value. A lot of Herodotus is actually just literature that we take and go, oh, that's interesting, but don't really glean history from.
Yeah, and Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars. Good history.
Again, we don't place unlimited faith in those writings, though. It just seems odd to me when you approach something like the Gospels that are no more reliable than something like Herodotus, that you would ask people to place absolute faith in something fallible.
None of us has absolute faith. Who here has absolute faith? All of us struggle with doubt. Nobody has absolute faith. I've never met anybody who has absolute faith. It's a question of what does the evidence point to? And the evidence clearly points to the historicity of Jesus of Nazareth. And it's based on the Gospel's historical reliability. Now, how do you determine historicity? For myself, I've got 4 tests. If you don't like my 4 tests, no problem. Come up with your own test. But just be consistent as you look at all of history. My 4 tests are internal consistency, literary style, archaeological evidence, and manuscript evidence. First test, internal consistency, meaning by that, are there contradictions within the text that point to massive confusion on the part of the authors? No. When you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you'll discover a tremendous internal harmony. Consistency. Second test, literary style. Is the literary style of the document once upon a time in the land of Nod, Wynken, Blynken, and Og took a boat ride? Well, that's obviously fairy tale, once upon a time. No, the Gospels are not once upon a time. The Gospels are, at this time, in this place, with these people around, Jesus said this, he did that. It reads like the New York Times, the LA Times. It's clearly historical narrative. That's the literary genre. Third test, archaeology. Are we talking about Jesus being born in the island of Atlantis and playing with Mickey Mouse and Elmer Fudd? No. The Gospels talk about him being born in Bethlehem, growing up in Nazareth, at the time of Tiberius Caesar. Archaeologically verifiable places and rulers. Fourth test. Today, the New Testament in English is based on over 5,000 Greek manuscripts or pieces of manuscript, dated from the 2nd through the 10th century AD, all agreeing to an infinitesimal degree. So it's obvious that we have what the eyewitnesses wrote. Now, what gives us any degree of certainty that what they wrote is the truth? Well, what convinces that for me is they died for what they claimed to have seen. The eyewitnesses who saw Christ risen from the dead died for what they claimed to have seen. That gives their claim a tremendous amount of credibility.
A lot of people die for what they claim to have seen, though. I mean,
Really? Give me one example.
Well, just off the top of my head, there's another Jewish Messiah in the 15th century, Shabtai Tzvi. Excuse me, that's not the example that I'd like to use.
Oh, I have a great example here.
Do you? Well, please jump in, Mike.
Well, according to the Chiron Peace Museum, 1,036 Japanese kamikaze pilots died in the World War II. Now, are you believing that their beliefs were true because they were willing to die for them?
No, that's not what I said. What I said was the eyewitnesses who saw Christ risen from the dead were willing to die, not for a belief. They were willing to die for what they claimed to have seen. The dead Christ risen from the dead.
Okay, who are these eyewitnesses?
These eyewitnesses were James, Peter, John, Matthew, Thaddeus.
They're paraphrasing earlier works. They're paraphrasing Paul, and Paul wasn't around Jesus during Jesus' life. He came later.
John, Matthew, Thaddeus, Peter, all saw Christ risen from the dead.
Repeating yourself is not going to make it true.
Repeating yourself is not going to make it true either. You're absolutely right.
The fact is, history's on my side with this.
No, sir. Eyewitnesses, Peter, Matthew, James, John, saw Christ risen from the dead, and they were willing to die for what they'd seen.
According to Paul, they're just copying what he wrote.
No, the Gospel of Matthew, 1st and 2nd Peter, James. Clearly,
They're
these guys.
based on Mark and Paul. These are secondary accounts. There are no contemporary accounts. None of these
James is an eyewitness, sir. He was a younger brother of Christ.
According to another person, this is a secondary account.
No, James wrote the letter of James in the New Testament. It wasn't written by Paul, it was written by James. Ignatius, Bishop of Antioch, Clement, Bishop of Rome, clearly talk about Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew. They quote him.
Yeah, they quote
They quote the Gospel of Matthew.
Yeah, they quote the document.
Yeah.
Secondary, it's a second-hand account. That's hearsay.
It's not a second-hand account. Matthew was an eyewitness. Matthew saw Christ, die, saw him risen from the dead, and he died for what he claimed to have seen.
I'm just going off. I'm not an expert in the Bible. I'm just going off of what the best scholars in the field are going.
Sir, I can promise you can find many New Testament scholars who disagree strongly with each other, obviously. So that's why you can't just listen to them. You have to go back and study the source documents. You got to go back and study Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and then you got to read the writings of the early church fathers, like Ignatius, Bishop of Antioch, Clement, Bishop of Rome, Papias, Polycarp, Eusebius. You've got to study their writings.
Well, let's see. Felix Phlegon is one of those sources, because these are all written pretty much at least a century later, with the exception of Paul.
Sir, how could the Gospel of Matthew have been written a century later if in 95 AD Ignatius, Bishop of Antioch, quotes Matthew? You're leaning on old scholarship.
Okay, so there's two that are within a century. That's not very strong.
No, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were all written within the 1st century. Jesus died around 33 AD. They are written within 60 years of his death.
It has to be.
They're within the 1st century.
Gosh, that's old information. 70 is our terminus postquam. It has to be written after 70 because the destruction of the temple is referenced. So,
why does it have to be written after the destruction of the temple?
Because it references the destruction of the temple.
Right, but notice what that's doing. What you're doing is you have a presupposition. You have a philosophical presupposition that says there is no such thing as prophecy, the ability to see the future. Therefore, for Jesus to say that the temple will be destroyed has to be written after 70 AD when it was destroyed. And that's obviously due to your philosophical presupposition of
And
naturalism.
the philosophical presupposition of everybody who studies history.
Yeah, is that not the default
Wait a
position that
second.
miracles don't have
Wait
to
a
be proven?
second. Wait a second. April 1865. Wasn't that when Lincoln was assassinated?
Correct.
All right. So if you read a life of Abraham Lincoln that does not include his assassination, don't you think it's wise to conclude that was written before April 1865? Because if I'm writing a biography on Abraham Lincoln and I exclude his assassination, his death, what's that all about? The evidence points to I wrote it before his assassination. Now, you've got the book of Acts that does not record the main character's death, the Apostle Paul.
Or
Therefore,
really written.
Therefore, it would be very wise to say, hey, the evidence is Acts was written before the Apostle Paul was beheaded. It was written before 68 AD or 69 AD. So you're right. The Gospels do not record the destruction of Jerusalem, do they? That is why it's wise to say, gosh, they were written before 70 AD.
Wait, they do reference it. That's the point.
No, they do not. They have Jesus making a prediction that the temple will be destroyed.
Can be written
But there is
after the
no
fact.
record in the Gospels of the
No,
temple
he
being
predicts that
destroyed.
His body will be destroyed and then raised in 3 days. And then the Gospels later attribute this to the destruction of the temple, which they assumed he was making. That point is obviously a later attribution. Jesus says nothing about the destruction of the temple. He says his own body will be destroyed.
Yeah, that's a later interpretation.
Yeah,
That was
like,
an
That's
opposite.
not true.
I mean, that's
in Matthew
all
chapter
we don't have.
24, in Mark chapter 13, and in Luke chapter 21, Jesus answers the disciples' question, hey, what's going to happen to this temple? And he clearly says it's going to be knocked down. Not one stone will be on top of the other. And that's exactly what happened in 70 AD when the Romans came in and destroyed the temple in Jerusalem.